Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new session in the Consciousness and Reality Graduate Conference at the University of Bucharest. The conference is organized by graduate students in the Mind the Brain MA program in Cognitive Science within the Department for Theoretical Philosophy. And we're delighted to be able to host this conference under the auspices of Selves, that's the Center for Logic, Philosophy, and History of Science at the University of Bucharest. And I should say that the organizers, whom I'm very grateful to have put this conference together as part of their professional training. So kudos for that. And our speaker today is Chingiz Pasha. Mr. Pasha is coming from the University of Tartu, and his talk today is titled Electrically Stimulated Reality, Sets of Phenomenal Experiences, and the Opportunity of Having Different Selves. Quite a challenging opportunity. Chingiz, thanks for being with us, and please take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for giving me this chance to present my work here. So now I'm sharing my screen. I hope you can see it. So is it okay? Can you see it? Anyone?
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
It's
great.
Good. Thanks.
Oh, great. Okay. So the topic is, as you said, electrically simulated reality, sets of phenomenal experiences, and the opportunity of having different selves. So my claim today will be these two. The first claim will be that electrically simulated reality, which is a speculative upgraded version of the VR technologies, can give us different phenomenal realities. And after presenting this claim, I will claim that, which is the main point of the presentation, in these different phenomenal realities, we can have different selves. So how am I going to demonstrate my claims? The presentation will have two parts. In the first part, I will talk about electrically simulated reality. I will present my two assumptions, which are phenomenal reality is the sum of phenomenal experiences, and brain is processing the data sets to give phenomenal experiences. So what I mean by brain is processing the data sets, I will explain it later in the presentation, which I hope will make it clear what I'm trying to say by that. And later, of course, I will make the introduction and comparison between VR technologies and the electrically simulated reality. And then I will talk about two versions of electrically simulated reality, because it's important to make this distinction for the second part of the presentation, which will be about possibility of having different selves. In the second part, when I talk about possibility of having different selves, I have to give my definition or some kind of definition to what self is. So here, instead of arguing a lot and focusing on all these philosophical background or philosophical history of the understanding of self, I will claim that self is some kind of adaptation to a set of certain phenomenal experiences. Then I will give the comparisons between self in actual reality, self in virtual reality, self in the first version of ESR and the second version of the ESR. Well, here is the first part. The first assumption is that actual phenomenal reality is the sum of phenomenal experiences. Well, yesterday when those presenters and the professors, when they were talking about these topics, of course, they made introduction to phenomenal experiences and qualia and the experiences such as what it is like kind of experiences. And we know that there are always these famous examples such as what it is like to drink a water, what it is like to see the color green. But phenomenal experiences are not limited to this. Usually phenomenal experiences also include our experiences regarding space, time, objects and subjects, self, and it goes on. So even if I am talking about what it is like to see a landscape, that experience also includes space, time, and other things. So the actual phenomenal reality for me at the end is the sum of these phenomenal experiences. It constructs the phenomenal reality for me. Well, this is the first assumption. Then we come to second assumption, and it is pretty triggering, and of course, lots of people can argue against this. This is that brain is processing the data sets of electric signals to give phenomenal experiences. Well, what I mean by electric signals is that are the sensory organs when they produce, for example, when I touch my laptop right now, the sensory organs are actually sending electric signals to the brain. And this mysterious organ somehow processes this data and gives me this phenomenal experience, that what it is like to touch my laptop. We have lots of, how to say, arguments about how brain is doing this, or if the brain is doing it or not. But the assumption is that brain somehow processes this data of electric signals and gives the phenomenal experiences. So these two assumptions are very important for me to go on in the presentation, because I ground my arguments on these assumptions. Okay, so virtual reality and phenomenal reality. Virtual realities are 3D environments where an agent can interact, play, socialize, date, and do lots of things. Actually, yesterday you also indicated that even this meeting is some kind of virtual reality. And we all know that in virtual realities, we have reality-producing devices, such as headsets, gloves, and etc. These reality-producing devices are interacting with sensory organs. So when I wear that VR headset, I feel it in my head, and I see some things on the screens of this headset, and I start to interact with the virtual reality. We know that when people, for example, and when they are not from the philosophy, they can say these kind of sentences that, wow, it was so real, it was indistinguishable from the reality, and this kind of things. So it actually shows how good or how convincing these realities can be, virtual realities. And what happens between reality-producing devices and sensory organs in virtual realities? Well, sensory organs get input from these devices and send signals to brain, and brain is producing this data and gives us some kind of virtual reality. But this is not a genuine phenomenal reality, because we still have the distinction of actual and virtual reality. And why we still have this? It is because the sum of phenomenal experiences are more or bigger than the sum of phenomenal experiences that we have in virtual reality. So actual reality has more things to offer us. That's why we have this distinction, and we don't see virtual realities as genuine phenomenal realities. When it comes to ESR, the electrically simulated reality, well, things are a bit different. This is a speculation, my speculation, but lots of similar ideas. We saw lots of similar ideas, some movies and stories. In this technology, the reality-producing devices are interacting with brain directly. What I mean by that is that this device will be something like Neuralink, and it will be connected to the receptors of the sensory organs in the brain. So with the research, we know that each sensory organ are stimulating certain parts in the brain. So maybe because of the improvement of the technology, it can be possible to connect to these receptors. And this small device can be placed on the skull and be connected to these parts with tiny links. And how the process will be? Well, the first step in this case is the observation and the collection of the data sets of electric signals from sensory organs. That if we don't know how the brain is processing it, at least we can observe how sensory organs are acting and what kind of electric signals they are sending and what are the intensity and the speed of these electric signals. And at the end, we can have a huge data on this. Then working on this data, we can create artificial sets of electric signals. In the second step is actually what ESR is doing. It blocks the receptors from the signals that coming from sensory organs and gives the artificial data sets that we created. And at the end, brain is processing these data sets and giving phenomenal experiences, which at the end, I claim that it can end up with having phenomenal realities. And this is my argument. If the assumption or presumption first and second are true, then in ESR, it's possible to send artificial data sets to brain to process it and give different phenomenal experiences, therefore phenomenal realities. Here, my second premise is that the assumptions that we had are true, which of course is possible to argue against. But still, if these assumptions are true, then we can conclude that it is in principle possible to create this kind of artificial data sets, send it to the brain, and at the end have these phenomenal experiences and phenomenal realities. Now I will show you the two versions of the ESR. Well, in the first version, we can think of something like a tool. So nowadays, we are using, for example, Zoom for this kind of meetings or some other platforms for other purposes. So the first version of the ESR can be something like this. The small device on the skull can be turned on. We can interact with virtual reality, then turn off and continue in our actual reality. It is very different from virtual realities because in this case, we don't have any input from the actual reality. Since it blocks the input from sensory organs, then when we turn it on, we are in a totally different world with a totally different body and doing certain things, maybe having this kind of meetings, dating, socializing, anything you can imagine. But still, we have the understanding or the distinction between actual reality and something not actual, such as this electrically simulated reality. And I claim that this will still happen because of the shortness of the experience. Experience will be short and we will see it as a tool. Therefore, actual reality will continue to be there. And the sum of phenomenal experiences that we have will be more in actual reality compared to electrically simulated reality version 1. But when we come to the second version, things are changing. I call it happy ending of the brain in a vat situation because it will be possible to be bodiless. The reality producing device can be directly connected to the brain like it was in the first version, but here we don't, or we may have an opportunity not to have the body. And this is the situation where we will start to have genuine phenomenal reality, because the actual reality, the signals that can come from actual reality will be blocked. There won't be any actual reality anymore for us. The actual reality will be the simulated reality that is given to us. But of course, there can be some arguments about who will choose these realities or who will be in power. I guess these are ethical or political aspects of the theory, which I'm not planning to dive into, at least here. And these are the reality-producing devices. In virtual realities, as I said, we have these kind of things in our hands or headsets. Even though we are in virtual reality, we are using our actual body uh, all the time. And when it comes to electrically simulated reality version 1, it can be something like this, having a small device on our skull connected to the receptors in the brain, and we can use it sometimes as a tool. And when it comes to reality producing devices as electrically simulated reality, it can be something like this. I mean, it will be mainly connected to the brain with some links, and we don't need something else. Now, we will start the second part of the presentation, which I think is the main part. And we will talk about the self and the opportunity of having different selves. In the first section, I said that phenomenal reality is the sum of phenomenal experiences. Now I have another claim which is connected to this somehow, is that self is adaptation to a set of certain phenomenal experiences. What am I meaning by this is that there is a self set somehow, and this set includes all phenomenal experiences regarding body, distinction of me and other, ownership over body, and similar things. This set is not certain. I didn't think about this a lot, and I guess it's possible to do a research on this, maybe already done. The adaptation part is very important here, because when we adaptate to a certain kind of phenomenal experiences regarding body, we can see it as self. It can be a new self for us. This is what I am claiming. Well, we can think about it in actual reality. So in actual reality, we have selves. Each person has a self, and these certain phenomenal experiences are constituting the self, and only the subject has access to it. So we remember our problem about qualia, that only subject has access to it. It is the same for the self. I cannot imagine myself being, I can imagine, but I cannot experience the world as being someone else. I can only experience the world as being myself. I don't know how it feels like to drink water as being someone else, and stuff like this. We have body, we get used to that body. Of course, sometimes certain things change about that body, but we still get used to it. And when we adaptate, it becomes ourself. And we also have a name for that, also imperfect history of that self, which is related to the imperfection of the memory. When it comes to virtual realities, in virtual realities, we again have a set of phenomenal experiences. And these experiences include the virtual environment, events and actions, one's virtual body, and ownership of the virtual body. What I mean by ownership is that sometimes there are some cases when we, for example, even though I'm not a gamer, I see some people when they play a game for a long time, they kind of identify themselves with that character. Or it is also, it can also be said about the movies. When we watch a movie, and when due to the camera, the points, how they shoot the movie, the way they show it, somehow we identify ourselves with the character. But after that, because of the shortness of the experience, we just forget it. We still have our actual body. Well, it's very similar in the virtual realities. They can be ownership, but that's it, nothing more. And of course, the most important thing is that we feel these reality producing devices on our actual body. I can feel the headset touching my face. I can feel the gloves on my hands. And if I'm tired, I feel the tiredness, sleepiness, hunger. So actual body, actual self is there all the time. So it doesn't let us forget that, and it doesn't help. It kind of creates a problem to adaptate to the virtual new self. But when it comes to electrically simulated reality, things are different. In the first version, there is nothing from the actual reality. The set of phenomenal experiences doesn't include anything from the actual reality. All features of the new different phenomenal reality is there, and all features of the new different self is there. But we cannot adaptate to the new self, even in this case, because the experiences are short. As I said, if we use it as a tool, for example, for a couple of hours a day, or for certain goals such as conferences, meetings, dating, we don't have enough time to adaptate and forget our actual self. Of course, there can be some extreme cases. Actually, there was an episode of Black Mirror, for example, that something like that happens. Or we know that in usual life, people sometimes go extreme. For example, they play lots of game, or they identify themselves with certain fictional characters. But these are extreme cases. So at the first version, we will probably not have adaptation to the new self. And also the most important thing is that health and safety of the actual body. That is to say, when I turn on the reality producing device, when I enter the new phenomenal reality, and when I interact with certain things, I have to go back, because the actual body is a biological body and it has certain needs. It needs to move, make some exercises, eat, and this kind of things. So because of this, an adaptation to a new self can be a problem. So body can cause certain problems. But when we come to the second version, well, this is where I claim that we can have different selves, because the set of phenomenal experiences will include all the features of the new different phenomenal realities. And each new phenomenal reality will actually be the actual reality, because there is nothing coming from the physical actual reality that we are having nowadays. And of course, we will also have all features of the new different selves. Differently from the first version, here we will have the opportunity to adaptate to the new self. First of all, because we will have enough time for getting used to the new self. Secondly, forgetting the old phenomenal experiences are very easy. Usually, when I'm thinking about something that I didn't do for at least a couple of days, for example, not drinking water, not eating, or not driving a car, or not cycling, we can remember or we can imagine ourselves doing this, but getting the phenomenal experiences regarding this is difficult and sometimes impossible. It's also same with the self. For example, people with some problems about sight, and if they get an operation, after the operation, it is difficult to remember how it was like to see the world with that blurry sight. But it actually determined the way of understanding reality for them for a long time. But still, they just forget it. So if we don't see the electrically simulated reality version 2 as a tool, and if we see it as a genuine phenomenal reality, which it will be actually like that, and if we are really forgetting all phenomenal experiences quickly, then we can adaptate to the new self, and we can have a new self. And at each new phenomenal reality, we will have a new self. This is my claim. And this is the argument that if we can have different genuine phenomenal realities, and if adaptation to a new different self set gives a different self, then it is possible to have different selves in the ESR version 2. And my second premise is that we can actually have different phenomenal realities and, phenomenal realities, and adaptation to a different self set gives a different self. Therefore, it is possible to have different selves in the ESR version 2. And now I will conclude. Well, what I talked about in this presentation is that in the first part, I talked about electrically simulated reality. I made some comparison with virtual reality technologies and also between the versions of electrically simulated reality. I argued that it is possible to have a genuine phenomenal experiences and genuine phenomenal reality in the second version, and it will be something like a brain in a vat situation. And in the second part, I talked about having different selves, especially in the second version of the ESR. I made some comparisons between actual, virtual, and the first version of the electrically simulated reality. I claim that self is adaptation to a set of certain phenomenal experiences. And at the end, I claim that it's possible to adaptate to a new self in the electrically simulated reality. But there are lots of problems. I mean, they can be lots of problems. Here I indicated some objections or questions that can be asked from me or can be against from me. And the first one is, of course, the arguments against brain, that brain is not responsible for the phenomenal experiences. What this can include, first of all, the arguments against physicalist approaches. Yesterday, we saw the discussions between both students and also professors about these topics, and we know that philosophy is full of these arguments. The second part is that what about the embodied cognition? That is to say, I focus on brain a lot. I actually think here that brain is responsible for the phenomenal experiences. But what about the body? What if we are underestimating the body because of the hormones and all other chemical things that going on in the body? And for example, the bacteria in our guts is actually interacting with our brain, and it actually interacts how we experience or how we perceive things. So this argument actually underestimates the body. So it can also be an objection. Or the phenomenal experiences without sensory organs. Since my argument was mainly about sensory organs and the input from sensory organs, one can ask, what about imagination? When I imagine something, I have the phenomenal experience. What is it like to imagine certain thing? And it is not an input from sensory organs. So what about these kind of cases? Will it be possible to simulate these two or not? And the second part of objections can be about the identification problem, that identification of artificial data sets of electric signals and new phenomenal experiences. Well, of course, we can remember Kripke's Naming and Necessity paper. I would argue here that we don't need a necessary identification here, as Professor Dumitru was talking yesterday, that maybe a cogency here can be pretty useful. What I mean by that is that we don't need to say that a certain data set is identical to these phenomenal experiences. We can be more or less sure, because nowadays the technology is that everywhere is screens, and we don't know when we produce a screen, we don't know how people will perceive it. Yet we can create screens and which is full of pixels, and at the end people experience more or less similar things. We go to movie, we see the same movie, and the screen is full of technology, but at the end we experience the similar things. That's why we can actually more or less be sure that the datasets that we create will give certain experiences. Also, the objections can be about self, that self is not the adaptation to a certain phenomenal experiences. or self set needs more clarification. These are also very important objections. And the fifth one is that what about the memory of the actual or the previous self? Because it can also be crucial. Well, I will not give answers to these questions or objections because it would take too much time and I don't actually have appropriate answers for these questions yet, but we can discuss it today, in the Q&A part or at a round table tonight. Well, thank you very much for listening to me. That's all.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chingiz. And now there's time for questions. And I already see a hand up from Catalin. Catalin, please go ahead. We can't hear you, I'm afraid.
I clicked 2 times, which doesn't help. Thank you, Andrei, and thank you very much, Chingiz, for this nice presentation. I like it because it's very well structured, which of course make it also easier for us to pinpoint the weaknesses and the strengths. And I have a clarification question about the self, because you said several times that we can adapt to the self. So I'm wondering, who is adapting to the self? And also if the self is the really this adaptation to a set of certain phenomenal experiences, it doesn't look that we need actually an ESR to change the self. Because we are changing the set of phenomenal experiences every day. So then does this mean that we are changing also the self every day by adapting to this set of phenomenal experiences?
Well, thank you very much for the question. It's very interesting. Actually, it would be something that I would say, yes. Of course, this change wouldn't be that radical because even though we are changing every day, or the phenomenal experiences that we are getting every day are different, but they are not radically different. But for example, let me give an example from my daily life. I'm using glasses and sometimes I have to buy a new one. And when I buy a new one, that glasses are a bit different. I start to see the reality a bit yellowish or greenish. And I get very angry that, this is not real. What I see is not real for several days. But later I get used to it and I start to see the world from that filtration. I guess we can also say something like that for the self. When I think about for myself, I lived in different countries, I lived in different situations, and of course, even though I say that they were me, but they are not actually me. I get used to living in this new location with these circumstances, and this is what the current me is me. And when I talk about myself, this is what I refer to. So when there are radical changes, yes, I agree with you that our self is actually changing in this actual reality as well. But the opportunities that when I was talking about that can be in electrically simulated reality, I was talking about actually mainly radically different things, such as different ages, different maybe sex, or different races, this kind of radical things that may be possible. I don't know if it's a satisfactory answer to your
it's
question.
clear. It's very extreme opinion, but very good answer in this extreme opinion. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that. And we have a new question from the hall, from Victor first, then Steph, then Sandra, and then Vladi. Okay, Victor, would you like to come up here so we could hear you?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
So, hello, and first I want to say, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I hear you.
Now you can also see me.
Yeah.
So I love nothing more than an exploratory paper on VR. So I love the subject so much. And I want to basically give a few observations. So the first idea and one of your assumptions about the electric signals. Does it mean that in this view, our brain remains just like an interface, like, Windows XP or Windows 11, whatever, to our reality? So it appears that it becomes only that in that view. And the second part of my question, it was about the idea of the selves, right? So here is the old problem of the ship of Thebes, right?
Yeah.
So doesn't it basically remain the same self even if you change as much as possible? So the propensity for change is there, and some would argue that it's infinite, others may not, but that's not our debate. The idea was, isn't it the same self, even if you have all those changes? And okay, you are basically adapting, but it's still the same self, and you are arguing that you can, let's say, forget your previous experience. I was wondering if they somehow do not remain latent, you know, and maybe you can access them at a later time. But those are just some thoughts. And thanks a lot for the topic. Very interesting.
Thank you very much for the questions. I mean, these are the things that I was thinking a lot while preparing this thing and while I was writing or discussing these things. The first question about so brain becomes something like a processor. Yeah, I mean, it is something that we give input, it creates something and gives us. The reason why I took brain with this function is that it's very problematic to claim something else. Even though I'm a philosophy student, I wanted to get more empirical knowledge about this. So I started reading lots of research about that scientists are doing in rats, how the perception works. And at the end, I didn't find something that we can hold. That are there any certain parts of the brain that we can say are responsible for certain perceptions? I mean, can we make certain identifications or not? And these identifications are very problematic. And because of this reason, at the end, I decided not to interact how the brain is actually processing this data. Maybe I can just focus on giving the data, let the brain do its work, then have the phenomenal experiences. The main reason is that I don't know how the brain works. And since I'm a philosophy student, I'm very ignorant about this topic. So I'm like, maybe I can just let it to scientists to decide how it processes the data. And when it comes to selves and memory, yes, you're right. The memory, even though I claim that we can forget certain things, of course, certain things can stay as well. But I don't know how important they can be. For example, of course, we know that childhood memories are important, or our historical background is important somehow for our current life. But when I think about daily life, I usually don't remember anything, or I don't come across with situations that I need to remember certain things from my childhood. It is not a good argument. It's not an argument at all, of course, to your question. But I was thinking that if we have a very radical environment or very radical reality, we wouldn't even need, or there wouldn't be things triggering us to remember certain things from different selves. Or even if there are, they wouldn't be that influential for us. For example, when you live in one country, then you move to another country, and you change a lot. For example, you don't remember the way you were living in the previous country. Your daily experiences are changing. The way you perceive the world is actually changing, or the language and things like that. And you don't actually remember the past that much. Well, these kind of things made me think that maybe the memory is not that important. But of course, your question is about personal identity also, and I don't have a good answer to that aspect of the question yet. But thank you very much. They are very good questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Chingiz, for that generous answer. Oh, would you like to come up here? Great. Okay, so we have a new question from the room from Steph. Steph, please go.
Okay.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. It was a very detailed and deep presentation. I share with you a lot of the ideas. And according with these common ideas, let's say, do you find in the current reality any argument that this is not a VR reality of another one? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. If I understood correctly, you are saying that if there is anything that I can find in the current reality that this is not the actual reality. Yeah? Well, actually, Chalmers, in his recent book, he argued this topic very, in detail, and he was also actually claiming that it is not that possible to find. But of course, sometimes I'm thinking about these kind of things, and sometimes there are details that are very weird or awkward. I mean, when you focus on certain moments in daily life, you start to see that things are pretty weird, and maybe things could be totally different or not this way. Sometimes it's very hard to comprehend moments or what's going on. In this kind of moments, yes, I start to think that maybe this is not the actual reality. Maybe this is some kind of fake thing that doesn't work well, that is imperfect, that made me think this way. But of course, it is a very problematic argument, because even as Chalmers also indicated, even if I have this kind of thoughts, or if I'm thinking that a higher intelligence has actually created this simulation, then they could also put these ideas to my head. So it may be a kind of game for them. So I don't see much thing. No. Yeah. Very unclear answer, but it's a difficult question, the most difficult question. Yeah.
All right, thanks so much for that. We have a big queue of questions heading up, and we'll probably spill over for about 3 or 4 minutes into the next talk. Next up, we have Sandra.
Okay.
Sandra, please go ahead. Oh, okay.
Hi, so thank you for this lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's amazing. I just have a question with regards to the self. If you think about the self in another way, as the self in VR being an extension in virtual reality of the same self, then the experiences that you have in virtual reality can impact the real self, but you need to somehow integrate that experience into kind of like there has to be a continuity between the set of phenomenal experiences that you have in VR and the set of phenomenal experiences that you have in what you call actual reality. Because think about the way VR tends to be used in a therapeutic way, for example, for those who have social anxiety or PTSD. What would your thoughts be on that with regards to the integration of that experience into the subject? It would have the same subject of consciousness, so the consciousness would somehow be in a continuum. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a very interesting question and idea. Well, why not? Because when I think about, for example, experiences, having phenomenal experiences, then you need some kind of pre-understanding of things. If it's not possible to be a baby in these new phenomenal experiences that I was claiming, then I would already have some kind of understanding of certain things, some kind of understanding of lives or values. So your question is, and your idea is very important in this case, because the filtration will be actually the same. I mean, maybe will remain something from the previous experiences. So when I experience new things in the virtual realities or in the electrically simulated reality, I will continue to add certain things to what I had before. Well, yes, it seems something like that. I better think about this more, and it is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, the idea was that if you somehow manage to integrate that into the actual self, then you probably it wasn't clear enough when the self changes. So
yeah.
when is the self a different self? I mean, maybe it's an more actualized self rather than being a different self. So
Yeah. I mean,
There's a thing there.
It is a very good question. I mean, for example, even if we forget about the actual self, if we only think about these genuine phenomenal realities that we had, new ones, then the previous self would end when the new self would start. And your question is very related to that, and it's an amazing question. I have to think. But it's a very interesting question. Thank you. Yeah.
All right,
Thank you.
we'll now move on to the next question. So much to ponder. Vladi, please go ahead.
Actually, Sandra, I can make the idea of multiple selves obsolete. Hi, once again, Chingiz. Well, I wanted to first of all to comment on the brain versus self part of the problem from the neuroscientific view, but I guess you're not going to answer that. I will just make a few points. Well, first of all, we do understand several areas of the brain where the specific visual or auditory information is processed. And we can stimulate them. It's pretty easy. It's not a big deal. However, we cannot account for all the connections in between those areas and our self, because our self includes, for instance, hippocampus, for instance, our memory about ourselves, our long-term planning. We always use our prefrontal cortex to make judgments about ourselves. And the way it works together, we don't know it. And here it's when the electrical stimulation is like using a giant hammer when you try to make jewelry. Because in fact, it's an intricate connection between electrical stimuli and chemical stimuli. So that's where the initial chemical compounds in the brain matter, where the type of receptors we have, which is genetically inherited, it matters. The initial amount of certain neurotransmitters you have. For instance, you can have a shortage of certain chemical, and then bam, you cannot experience certain experiences no matter how you stimulate them. So it's a long way to go for that to be an alternate experience rather than build upon already existing one.
Yeah, that sounds very plausible.
But instead of that, I will ask the question more related to what Sandra said, which is, well, we can talk about ourselves. Absolutely, 100% phenomenal experiences are the part of ourselves. How we feel is what we are. But at the same time, we have memory, which is also not necessarily just memories from the childhood. We have a narrative part of ourselves. So you can forget some experiences from your childhood. By the way, I can relate to you because I moved to another country and I've been here for more than a half of a year. We can forget certain experiences. We won't remember them all the time, but still they line up with the narrative we have about ourselves. And we, into virtual reality, we come with that narrative. I am someone who does something like this, and that's how I got here. That's why if you are aware that you're using virtual reality, and you have already this narrative about yourself, you will never get an actual new self. You will just have a more actualized self, a self with different sort of phenomenal experience, but not a new self.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for the.
Chingiz, so what do you say?
Yeah, the first part of the question, I mean, the information about how the things work now in the brain. Well, it is very important, yes. And when I actually indicated the embodied cognition, I actually meant also something similar to this, because when I talk about brain, since I don't know much thing, and since it's not only electrical connections, but also some other chemicals and hormones and these kind of things, it cannot be roughly electrically simulation. But since I don't know them, I kind of how to say, used the word electrically simulated reality in order to just embrace all of them, because I don't know, I'm ignorant about that aspect. And when it comes to the question, which was actually related to Sandra's question, what you indicated, one thing was very important, that when you are aware of that you are in virtual reality, things would be different. Yes, I totally agree with you. This is why actually I introduced two versions of electrically simulated reality. In the first version, we use it as a tool. So it can be some kind of, yes, I am this, but I also have this, I can also have this kind of more extended experiences. But when it comes to the second version, there is no actual body anymore, and there is no actual reality anymore, since you are just something like brain in a vat. And every simulated reality that you have will be the actual reality, because that's the only thing you will have access to. This is why in this case, it will be a genuine phenomenal reality, not just virtual reality. And I guess if this can be the case, then we will not see it as a tool. So it will not be just, yes, I'm in a virtual reality, but this is reality, and I am in reality. So I think this distinction maybe can be some kind of answer to your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Chingiz, for a wonderful talk. It's the ones that occasion most question and controversy that get us started. So please join me once again in thanking him for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving this chance.
And with that said, let's take our customary 5-minute break and come back for the next talk.
Okay.